some very good news. You've had a Saudi delegation go to Sana'a, to the Yemeni capital, and I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this, but there's actually some real diplomacy going on, and some hope of peace, right? So here's the Saudi ambassador to Yemen, but he's not meeting with the Saudi-backed government, right, or the internationally recognized government. He's meeting here with the Houthi rebels, as they're called, right? It just so happens that 80% of Yemenis live with these rebels. So I think it's time you start recognizing them as a government, because they are. I know that wasn't the Saudi position until now, but it is, right? And you can see them actually meeting face to face. And why is this different from the last couple of years? Why is it different? Well, before, there's been a truce. You've had multiple truces or ceasefires, but they weren't really applied. They weren't actually put into practice. Now things are actually being put into practice, and this is because of what China recently did. China got Iran and Saudi Arabia to sit down and hash things out, and they've normalized ties. There's been a rapprochement, and that is great, not just for Saudi Arabia and Iran, but you can see also for Yemen, because Yemen has been kind of I wouldn't say caught between the two, because they like to frame it like, Iran was tugging from one side, and it's kind of Iran like shares responsibility for what's happening in Yemen, which is ridiculous. That Iran obviously supports their struggle, but Saudi Arabia is the one that has to really atone for all this. And it's not me saying that; it's the Houthis who are saying really, very clearly, unequivocally, that you have to rebuild everything that you've destroyed, and the country is rather in tatters. And when it comes to the ports, I did extensive reporting about the oil embargo against Yemen, right? So basically, you would have these ships carrying fuel on their way to Yemen, but the Saudi-led coalition would kind of step in. Even though they had clearance from the UN, these fuel ships, the Saudis would grab them and take them to the side and just hold them for no reason except to screw Yemen. Just hold them for months, sometimes even over a year. And by the time that fuel ship that fuel has actually reached people at the pump, the cost has doubled, because when the ship is not being used, the person who owns the ship is gonna basically they're called demurrage costs. And you can read all my stuff because on Substack, because I did a report with a Yemeni economist, right? He's Oxford graduate, World Bank. He knows the ropes, and we sat down and did this report together, and we really showed like how even if you take, even in the best of cases, the country is being destroyed by this this siege, right? This Saudi siege. And so, like I said, in the past, when there would be a ceasefire or a truce, Hodeidah, which is the main seaport, they would never really open it to Saudis. And so, this siege would continue, and people would still have to pay, astronomical costs for medicine or for food or for to keep the lights on, because everything depends on fuel. So now the Houthis are saying very clearly to the Saudis, you have to really open the airport at Sana'a and also the seaport in Hodeidah. Hodeidah is very close to Sana'a. It's as I mentioned at the beginning of the segment, 80% of the Yemeni population live in the vicinity. So it just from a geographical point of view, it makes no sense to use any of the other ports when you're bringing in fuel to the country, right? So there was a very clear, screw you attitude from the Saudis. Like, we are not going to let you use this port, even though everybody lives near this port, even though the capital is near here. No. We're going to reroute all the ships here after we've held them for months and make everything, all the costs climb. So, the Houthis are saying very clearly, the airport has to be opened. Hodeidah has to be opened. There has to be a prisoner swap. So they're also talking about that. And, you know, let's face it, this is thanks to China, because if China hadn't got Saudi Arabia and Iran to just sit down and hash things out, I don't think this, you know, the climate in the region and would have allowed for it, okay? And internationally, it just wouldn't have allowed for it. But now it's happening. It's quite extraordinary, I must say. And what's funny to me is how the CIA director, Bill Burns, his reaction to all this is to go to Saudi Arabia and basically give them a mouthful. Like, how dare you make peace with Iran behind our backs or without telling us? How dare you make peace with Yemen and Syria without telling us? So this is from CNN, and they're referencing a Wall Street Journal piece that said Burns, so the CIA director, expressed frustration with Saudi officials over Riyadh's recent rapprochement with Iran through a diplomatic deal brokered by China, as well as the kingdom's openings with Syria. Frustration is pretty clear. I mean, my only frustration with all this is that it didn't happen sooner. I think Mr. Burns has a different type of bone to pick with the Saudis. I think he's, you know, the Americans, what was the word he used? They were blindsided by this or something like that. You can read it in the Wall Street Journal. It's really funny, you know, like you would think that something bad was, you know, happening. No. You're making peace. We can't have that. Remember, the United States and a lot of people who are in Joe Biden's administration now helped destroy Yemen. They helped start the war on Yemen. They sold, I mean, Donald Trump as well. So we're talking Obama administration, Trump administration, and then I think the Biden administration really, they're from the first one, which is my point. They sold so many guns and bombs and you name it to the Saudis, right? Everything. They made, what was it? I think it's $115 billion worth of weapons under Obama, and then Donald Trump did $300 billion. It's at least $415 billion worth of weapons that the United States sold to Saudi Arabia to use against Yemen, right? So they have a lot of blood on their hands. Just going back to the oil embargo, you know, what I was talking about with the point that we were trying to get across in our report is that this oil embargo against Yemen is so bad, you know, it's just as bad as the bombs, if not worse. Let that, you know, sink in, so you can understand the gravity of the whole situation. Here you've had also, this is from, I think from Reuters, they say that Jake Sullivan, who is, again, one of these war criminals, you know, he's now Biden's national security advisor. So he had a talk on the phone, right? This is a few hours ago with the Saudi crown prince to discuss Yemen and Iran, right? So they're still not over it, apparently. They're not. I don't think they'll be getting over this anytime soon. Let me tell you why. Because not only is this good news for Yemen and good news for the region, but if you're China, I mean, wow. On the world stage, you're the king, right? You're the king. I think the United States, to a certain extent, they've always tried to make themselves, I know this sounds funny to say, but they've tried to make themselves look like the real peacemakers and diplomats, right? I think Bill Clinton with Arafat and, you know, and the Israelis, there is to a certain extent, you know, some kind of effort to look like, oh, we are the ones who get people together and make them hash things out, and we are the peacemakers, which again sounds ridiculous if you look at the United States foreign policy. But now all of that is gone out the window, right? Like there's nothing from the United States or from the UK that matches what China is doing, right? On an economic scale as well, but just to come here and get Iran and Saudi Arabia, right, who we've been taught and for years by the media are these like arch enemies and arch rivals, and in every Western university they brainwash you with this poison that somehow, you know, it's a Sunni and Shiite thing, like that, you know, just a bunch of crazy Muslims running around who hate each other. Apparently, China made all of that go away. Wow. Well, guess what? Now China, they are the peacemakers. They're the ones who look rational and calm and productive. And the United States does not. The United States just profited from this and did nothing whatsoever to get Iran and Saudi Arabia to hash things out, right? China's the one who did that. So Beijing, I mean, wow. You know, I'm saying this, you know, seriously, congratulations. And you know, I'm not saying it's an easy thing. You know, I don't buy this. Oh, it's a Sunni Shiite thing. That's rubbish. That's when they tell you that. When they tell you, oh, it's Sunni and Shia, this is the go-to excuse for the West, right? To make themselves look innocent, right? Like, oh, we had nothing to do with this mess in Iraq. We had nothing to do with you know, inflaming these sectarian tensions. We had nothing to do with this. It's just the locals, the natives and the locals. They're cuckoo, you know. Some of them are Sunni, some of them are Shia. They don't like each other. That's the reason. It's not because, you know, we have anything to do with that. America's innocent. Britain is innocent. You know, France is innocent. We have nothing to do with it. So, you know, I think the worst part is that it's not just those governments. The governments of these countries who say that. You have actual academics who believe this garbage and teach this in universities, right? They teach it as if it's set in stone and it's the only explanation for any sort of you know, discontent between Saudi Arabia and Iran and in the region as well, right? So they'll tell you that Hezbollah is supported by Iran because Hezbollah is Shia and that's the only reason. And in Yemen, right? Perfect example. The only reason Iran supports the Houthis is because they happen to be Shia. This is ridiculous. How do you explain Iran's support for Venezuela? Are Venezuela also that's a Shiite country as well? What about Hamas? Are they also Shiite? Come on, man. Stop this nonsense. You know, you don't insult my intelligence with this drivel. So, I think I'll just add one more thing. It's not just China who's managed to put things together. We have to be honest. The Saudis are cutting their losses. I reported to you how the Houthis, Yemen, were able to strike Aramco. Aramco is the Saudi oil company. Yeah, right. The props. You know, it's the top dog. So how the hell were the Houthis able to do this? They did it with drones. Now remind me, who is supplying drones to Russia right now? Who is building the most sophisticated drones? It's Iran. So Iran is the one that helped the Houthis in this regard with the transfer of technology, right? I wouldn't say the military support is as great as they claim in the media, but it certainly exists to a certain extent. And the fact that they were able to strike Aramco and just really embarrass the Saudis during the Formula One races, and also strike the UAE. We're talking, what is it, 2,000 kilometers? It was some ridiculous distance, right? Where I mean, they tragically killed a few workers who have nothing to do with this, but you know, this tool in the hands of Yemen all of a sudden changed the landscape on the battlefield. And the Saudis found themselves, you know, disliked on the international stage because everyone could see the humanitarian disaster that they had caused in Yemen. Militarily, they were struggling. And now they were also getting a taste of their own medicine and well, they were beginning to actually see this war at their doorstep in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. So these new realities, plus the war in Ukraine, and when I say war in Ukraine, I don't mean the war, I mean the ripple effect it's had, where you're seeing a multipolar world come together. All of this combined, I think the Saudis said, you know what, let's cut our losses. Let's sit down with Iran. Let's sit down with Syria. Let's sit down with the Houthis. And that's it. You know, we make peace and we move forward. And it's a smart move because whatever this multipolar world is going to be, Saudi Arabia is going to want to be a part of this, new reality. And now is the time to get on that train. It's now or never. And they have made I mean, it's not just about, you shouldn't think of it in business terms. It's a moral thing. It's an ethical thing. They should have stopped this war a long time ago and made peace a long time ago. But, better now, better late than never. So I'm glad to see some diplomacy happening. Contrast this with the war in Ukraine, right? Where there's no diplomacy happening and there's only destruction. It's so good to see a different model being proposed, and that is exactly what the Chinese have done. And I'm glad everyone who's gonna be crucial to this multipolar world is really adopting and accepting diplomacy as a model. That's what we need. We need more of this. This is the way. I know this is perhaps obvious, but one last thing that I would add, why the Saudis, decided at this stage to make peace is there was no U.S. support anymore. And you might be thinking, well, that's weird because who sold them all these weapons? Wasn't it the U.S.? Yeah, you bet. It was the U.S., it was Canada, it was the U.K., it was Germany. All of them have blood on their hands in Yemen, unfortunately. But you heard the Saudis multiple times complaining about how there wasn't enough support, right? So they wanted even more. And this means intelligence, this means logistical support. It's a wide array of things. And they felt that the United States was letting them down in this regard, right? And I think that is also something that you should take into account and something that we should mention because it's very important, right? It's very important. You've been hearing this for almost 2 years now since Biden took office. And you remember Biden said he wanted to make the Saudis a pariah. I mean, that's a joke because he never did. And when he went to the Saudi Arabia, he fist bumped MBS. That was the extent of it, right? But nevertheless, for them, one of the reasons why he didn't get an oil deal and why they cut production at OPEC, one of those reasons was the lack of U.S. support in the war in Yemen. And so, ultimately, the Saudis made the smart move. They cut their losses and moved on.